Yes, hello. Dr. Chris Lamont here. This is Wellness Code number 9, I do believe. And so it's the second aspect of it's kind of cute because it's part of the material. It's the second aspect of the Wellness Code technique, which compromises these last four, or the last four. There's there's one after that. So we've actually got 2 more on Wellness Code, and then one more, which is just simply a summation of the whole piece. So we should be done sometime in April. Those people that are watching calendar, right? All right. So with Wellness Code is simply, it's designed to be able to have you have another interface, a different state of being. And this is so normal that talking about is really funny, because anything that we learn professionally, we step into a state of being that person, right? We step into a skill set that you developed. If you make cookies, and my mother, when I was a kid growing up, she made candy. But she would make candy before the holidays around November, and then she would put them in boxes and she would sell them. So she did it as an income. And literally we had in the kitchen, we had a slab of marble, and we had a little heating device that would put underneath the marble. It was kind of a jack stand that came up underneath there, and it'd be a little burner. So the marble would be warm, and that way she could melt her chocolate and make her. So I can remember when I was a kid growing up, we were always taking candies and putting them in those little paper sleeves, and then putting them in boxes, and then wrapping them up and putting a little tape and ribbon on them so that we could take them to the local churches or wherever that she would go to market her products and sell them. And we made a lot of candy. I didn't eat a lot of candy, but we made a lot of candy. So I guess that's why it was easier for me to separate from the concept of being a big candy eater, is because there was so much exposure to it. I really got tired of the smell of it. I mean, chocolate smells great, but the sugary stuff really started getting to me, and I was like, I've had enough. So by the time I was 8, maybe 7 or 8, I was pretty much kind of done with that. And occasionally, maybe in life for the next few years, we might have candy on special occasions or something, and then eventually it's just like it become very distant. And now I just think it's so interesting because I see people, they give me a box of candy for a holiday or something. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, so I'm trying to think, what do I do with it, right? Because I don't know that many people that eat candy. So it's like, yeah. I had Mars Candy Company one time when I was managing a grocery store, give me a whole bunch of candy. I didn't know what to do with it. I took to a children's center, and then after I gave them this, whole truckload of candy, and then I got thinking, oh, it was probably a really horrible thing to do. It didn't do them any good either. But anyway, it is funny how we get our head around ideas and concepts. That's why I told you the story. We get our head away because we see ourselves thinking in a certain sort of way. I just assumed that all those kids would think it's great to get candy, but probably, they probably do everything to keep them from being hyper and emotionally strung up and anxious, and the candy probably didn't do them any good. That's what I'm saying, is that we view things through a set of eyes, through a certain view, through a certain criteria. We might not see things in a certain way. And then when we move into a different state of being, then we all of a sudden notice things. If you're reading a paper, you might not notice an error. But if you're correcting someone's paper, it's a different frame. Then you're looking through and you go, oh, I think that's misspelled. Oh, I think the punctuation is wrong. Other than that, you just scan through it, and it's like San Francisco Chronicle used to be horrible on spelling. I don't think even I would go through and find misspelled words. I was reading and think, oh my goodness, they don't edit this at all. Now it's not that way, but it was for a few years. When I lived in San Francisco, I was always, it's like, wow, I love it. I just could go through and find things and go, wow, amazing. I'm usually the one that misspells everything, right? So it's just a state. It's a reference. We develop. I wouldn't be surprised if people don't have several hundred of different states of existence, right? Most of them come because we get into a new job, we get into a new relationship. Most certainly, you recognize that some people are only married on certain occasions, and we've seen lots of evidence for that. All those things become a state that we can get into. We can get some of them we can get in and out of on a regular basis. If you've got a job, you come home and you're no longer, that person. And I've got a friend of mine who's a cook, and I remember going to his house and they said, "Oh, you made this?" Because we're eating dinner. And he said, "Oh, no, my wife made it. She does all the cooking at home." I go, "Oh, that's interesting. That's intriguing. Wow, she does. You work all day as a chef. And of course, you come home, it's like, I don't want to look at another bean sprout. I've had it for today. No more roast, no more anything. So, whatever you make is fine." It's an interesting way to look at that, right? It's like, and he'd been at it for quite a little while. Very interesting character. So he could step out of that state. And I'm bringing it up because I remembered back at one night I was late because I was working, and I met him and his wife and my partner and I. We met them at a restaurant, and I pulled up in my truck and I came in, sat down, and then joined right into conversation. And then he said to me a little later, "I'm amazed how fast you can interface from like traffic and working, and you pull up out there and the traffic was bad because you're a few minutes late. And then you come in and sit down. And it's like you just totally matched right in with us, just in a heartbeat in a second." Yes, I'm sure can do that too. Some of you might take a little longer to match in, but you know what I'm talking about. We can change that state. I'm no longer was driving down the highway and now I'm sitting down. And we've known people that have a really hard time changing that state and sit there and just want to regurgitate what just occurred and just can't seem to get away from it. We've seen all of those abilities. We want to develop a state so it's easy for you to phase into it. One of the things that I found from years of teaching is what makes it easier to phase into it is if it's not externally structured. I changed the background a little bit today. What bookcases are behind me. I've got a different angles and just to mark the idea that we're looking at a different state, a different view, right? So you start to see that there's different facets of a wall over there with those are music projects of my wife. There's albums that she's released. There's drums sitting around, musical instruments. There's other chairs. There's more bookcases everywhere. And you start to see that there's a diversity, at least a different viewpoint. And that's what a state becomes. It's a different viewpoint, a different interface for you. You actually start to think a little differently. You act a little differently. It comes into a timing set that is very comfortable for your body, which we call metabolic timing, right? It's not identically the same for everybody. Out there in the external world, we have a timing sequence that we set our watches by. It's really designed on the movement of planets, right? The sun, etc. It's the movement of planets that dictate that time, or decaying radioactive materials. So it just means that most of the stuff out there has a clocking speed that matches, and our metabolic rate lots of times doesn't even come close, doesn't match it at all. So to change the state consciously, you have to then start to experience it. That's why when you read a book and you're trying to get the idea, you might have a conversation with people, you might interact a little bit, you might have to go take a class, you might have to read the book again, you might have to, what you're trying to do is get it translated from those facts into what works in my body. That's what you're trying to do. And then it becomes you. You become the person who has implemented, applied the data, has brought it into your body, and it's got an integration going on for it. So how do we do that? What are those little steps called? I know you're all familiar with them, but what do we call them? So those things have to have a timing shift change, and we're going to do that in two different ways. And so today we're going to look at it from a standpoint of language. Language is interesting piece because language is just an assignment to a symbol, right? Everything in the world is just an empty space with a symbol. So that means that then it represents something. So then we put a title on it, and then that explains the symbol, right? So that's the theory anyhow. So when you start to look at all those assignments of those words, then they'll dictate a certain meaning. We can then change language a little bit and get more of a flow or get more of a movement in there. We can change the structure of it a little bit. So there's a lot of latitudes in our symbolic system. It's a very good system. It, was made a long time ago. There's a lot of short-sightedness in it now, but it keeps growing in numbers, right? Every time you get a new dictionary, unabridged dictionary, just like the volume gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we have a lot of words out there, and I don't think anybody running around knows all those words. All right. So just a quick second overview, and then I'll drop into the language structure. The second step is that in the wellness code, we started it last month. And remember, I'd ask you to go ahead and start to play with in training, right? So one of the best ways to start to notice is that by in training with someone, you notice you can get data by sitting with them and feeling as they feel as they talk about it. Another thing is if you're reading the data, getting that kind of information that gets downloaded in, then you've got to sync it. When you're in training with someone, it kind of automatically just syncs, right? All right. In music, it's that way. In music, if you're going to play in a different key, you've got to transpose it on a musical instrument. But if you're singing and someone changes a key, your voice will just adjust. Most people have a key they can sing in easier than other keys, but literally they'll change. We already know how to make those changes. It's already in here as long as it's within its context and not context out there, okay? Very, very simple. Just takes a second, and it takes a certain felt response. Okay, so this next step is to start to produce a demonstration. In other words, produce an integration. Can we get it? Can we get an idea that's abstract, get it into our body, and start to produce something where we can demonstrate, I know it, I can do it, right? The demonstration in life is, or the test for life is that you can produce a demonstration. You can make it happen, right? My kids would always come back and say, do I have to clean my room? And I said, prove it to me. Go clean it, and I'll tell you if it's I have to or I did it. And they'd always look at me, you don't make any sense. I said, don't worry about it. They just go clean the room, and they come out, all right, I clean my room. And I said, yeah, you sure did. You did it. Now we don't have to worry about whether you have to or not. We're solved, right? You get it? Okay. Anyway, both the demonstration and the definition are metabolic. They're feeling based, right? They feel a certain way. They're not cold, hard facts. At best, an approximation, but close enough to support life. Something new or different would have to not be anything known. Maybe not with even they might have an idea of doing something, and it may not be within the human design package. In other words, you might train with someone and you go, oh my goodness, I don't know how to do it. I'm asking them and they don't know how to do it, right? Now we've had that experience, right? So then it's like, wow, now I got to go sit with it and figure out how I would do that, right? That's the whole idea. And then you rise to the state of I'm the person doing it. And that's a state of you being. And once you accomplish that, then pretty much it's ingrained to you. And even if you don't do it, like swimming, riding a bike, you don't do it for a long time, you can refresh really very fast because that all you're doing is finding that state. It's a package that we put together. We want wellness to be a package. You'll walk in, you look and say, that cheesecake looks good. Okay, but I'm keeping down the sugar. I'm trying to maintain my weight. I'm trying to stay healthy. I'm trying to, blah, blah, blah. And so it becomes just a state rather than a task, right? And that's what we're headed towards. Okay. Tense. Let's talk about the language. Tense is one thing in language, and tense really has more to do with location than in reference to an event, late for, early for, on time for, where are you at, past tense, future tense, right? Those are more to do with tense. Aspects is an interesting thing in language, and it already assumes that time is in there. I might say, hey, I've got to run to the store. And you'd say, oh, okay. You're already assuming that it's going to take time for me to go to the store and come back to go get whatever I have to do. So that is an assumption. I don't have to say, I got to go pick something up at the store, so I've got to go drive the car, and I'll be gone for as long as it takes to get from here to the store, and for as long as it takes from the store to, I don't have to say all that. I just say, I got to go to the store. It includes all those time elements. So it fits in the metabolic piece. So when we start to reference something new, all we have to do is refresh on what those markers are. Now, I used to teach this whole system for years under different labels, but the same concepts and ideas for a long time. And I used, my background is in meta markers, which is simply, meta is just simply patterns within a pattern. So the patterns on the surface can change. It's kind of like you live in a house, you could paint the walls, move the furniture around, but the meta pattern is most certainly the shape of the house. Unless you move out a wall, or tear out a floor, or tear out a divider, pretty much the basic pattern, the structure of the house is still there. You just change the whole procedures in it. So I used to play it off of some of the meta patterns that I played with, and I found 3 were quite effective. Then I read a book by Dr. Martinez, The Mind-Body Code, How to Change Your Beliefs That Limit Your Health, Longevity, and Success. And his code was bigger in scope, but most certainly in part of that book, he did deal with states, and he had 4 aspects written, and they were in a, and I used to use 3, and I got reading his, and I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. I totally discounted the one that's easy for me, and that totally makes sense. I didn't see the one that my strength was at. What I saw were the ones that I had more of a challenge with. So I had to mature my view and be able to then go to 4 of those aspects. And I'm using some of his language, is why I gave him credit. I think his language was easier to translate and find meaning for this, okay? So let me read you some of this so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. The first aspect that we're going to play with, remember, an aspect is just something that includes time. If I said, draw me a picture of an apple, that would automatically include that it would take you time to draw the picture, right? Those are aspects. So automatically has the assumption of, right? So if I say, paint the wall, I'm going to paint the wall today. It tells you I'm going to be at it for a time, right? Okay, got it? Okay, the first one we're playing with is resilience. Resilience, it just means that things are bendable, right? They'll come back. They'll come back. They'll come back into shape. The ability to return to its original position, to its original form, it has a bendability to it. It moves a little bit. Resilience. An aspect is something that starts to be, you got to remember when you get to metabolic terms, you're really looking at focus in this body is all about balance, right? It's all about balance. And so when we start doing this, everything has to be its cost to balance. When we run off of deadlines out there and we have to rush somewhere, we have to do something really quick, we're pushing this, try to accomplish something in that time out there. And this then starts to lose its sense of balance. Sometimes physically it loses balance and we get dizzy and fall, but sometimes emotionally we start to lose balance. We don't feel like we're accomplishing. And so this gets challenged. So we really have to have that piece into it. So one of the aspects of the 4 that we're going to be playing with is resilience, okay? So that means it has a certain amount of elasticity, it stretches, it'll bend. We say the brain has a lot of resilience, has elasticity, it stretches, it bends. If something gets blocked up there, it'll grow a channel around it. It's kind of amazing. We find now the arteries can also do that to some relative degree. They don't get quite as large, but most certainly they can route blood around the blockage. So they're given enough time. So resilience is something that's most certainly context of a metabolic piece. Perseverance is the second one. Perseverance. Persistence in a course of action. So you're going to be steadfast with something. You're going to persevere. You're going to move through that action to arrive at the other end. So you have to persevere. Lots of times when you get started and you have an impatient piece like I do, I get started in something and I really just like, I want to, okay, I've had enough. I've done this long enough. I quit. So perseverance is something that was a big challenge for me to be able to say, God, I hate to stick to this. I'm done. This has taken forever. But, I've done a lot of things to play with that in my life going up. Every winter, I put together a jigsaw puzzle, which takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days. So I get one with about 1,000 pieces, and I assemble a jigsaw puzzle. And then I kind of persevere. That's my practice and perseverance. My personal practice and perseverance. A lot of is putting together jigsaw puzzles. I like that. I got involved in stained glass and making stained glass windows. And that's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's just that you're taking a sheet of glass and you're cutting it, breaking it is what they call it, breaking it into the right shape, grinding it, fitting it together, taping it, soldering it, and putting together like a jigsaw puzzle. I started doing that to develop more patience. Anyway, perseverance is the number 2 one. Number 3 is creativity. That's the ability to transcend traditional concepts. In other words, it's to move out of structure. You can start to create it in a novel or a different sort of way. I had a girl that was, she designed pages. She was an artist. She designed pages in children's books, and she worked for a publishing company in San Francisco Bay Area. And she was a student of mine. And I used to try to talk her into doing some like a little artsy thing, especially for the holidays. And she was always resistant to do that. She said, no, I do art for a living. I don't want to have to sit down and draw pictures or some silliness like that. It's, not what I want to do. But I finally did talk her into making some wreaths. And so we did a wreath workshop. And I've done a lot of different ones. So I've done a candle workshop. We've done all kinds of things, just kind of a sense of getting people together in community, and we would then work on a project. So we literally went out. A matter of fact, I worked it out with the city. They were trimming along the freeway some bushes and greenery. And I went out there with 2 friends and 2 pickup trucks, and we filled the trucks full of greenery that just was freshly cut by the city crew along the edges of the freeways, or for there is Caltrans crew, and got it all cleaned up, threw it all in the truck, and I took it back, and I threw a big, huge tarp on the floor, and I put all this greenery, and we sorted it all out. And then we got the frames for the wreaths. It's a little wire things, and we got the clips that you put in there. And then we started with her. She was supposed to be there to start the workshop, and she was late. So I had to kind of fake my way through it, which I do just fine. So I've got everybody started, and they're starting to design their wreaths, and they're putting some together. And we had 2 or 3 wreaths that someone had made. And so we had them up as kind of a samples, and they were starting to work on it. And it was really fun. Everybody was having a good time. Everybody was doing something novel. We had berries. We had all kinds of things laid out on this huge area in the middle of this floor of what was basically a warehouse. And we had tables sitting around the side, and they could go to their tables. We had chairs sitting around, and they could go ahead and put their wreaths together, put those things on a clip on. It was really a lot of fun. Then she showed up finally, like 15 minutes late, and she comes in and she says, great, everything's done. It's looking good. So I'll just start making a wreath. So she grabbed a frame and she started putting together. I had mine already pretty much made. It doesn't take very long to make a wreath, really. You just get adventures from it. And it was really fun because I made 2 of them. I made one for myself and I made 2 for 2 friends of mine that weren't there. And so I made 2 wreaths. I don't much do Christmas, so I didn't have much need for it, but I did make 2 of them. And then I started watching her. And all of us were making wreaths that had a lot of symmetry in it and followed a lot of order. And hers were totally unique. I mean, it's just like, wow. I'm looking at it thinking, oh my goodness. I thought this was a totally creative project. And I thought I was being creative. But now I look at mine, it's just like, I'm playing off of balance. It's all balanced. It's like, wow, that's an inherent piece that's in there. To get into creativity requires that you step out a little bit on the edge. That's why it's a little scary sometimes to be creative. So I turned around and made a third reef just because I got inspired by how creatively that she put all these greeneries and berries and stuff that we've had laying around and pieces of sage and whatever else we could collect. And she's sticking us all together. And it's like, wow, this is just so profoundly amazing. It's just like watched it develop. And so creativity is an important thing. It's just like, novel is not by itself just enough word. You have to be able to get a flow of it. It has to, in that creative project, when we said make reefs, that's an aspect too, because it's going to take time, and it did. So we had a lot of fun with it. Okay. And the fourth one is flexibility, capable of being bent, usually without breaking, right? Easily bent, susceptible to modifications, adaptability. So it's a little bit like resilience, and part of where I lost this with that, I was putting that all together into one. We really need to have two viewpoints. Resilience means it does come back to its form. Flexibility means that it can actually change and hold a new form. You have to have both aspects available, right? So considering what you're going to do with it. When we develop a state, we have to have both those elements. We have to be able to have something spring back, and then we have to have other things, if it's our intention to bend it, straighten it, and make it a different way, than to leave it and let it hold that form. So we need to have all of those four components tied together. Now, how are you going to do that, right? I'm the storyteller. You're going to have to do the work. So one of the best things that I've found, and what we normally do when we do this in a live workshop, is we sit everybody down and we have them do a meditation. And this is how I'm going to suggest that we do this. When you get done listening to this, set yourself some time aside, about 20 minutes to half an hour, right? That's an aspect. And start to search these for yourself. I usually like to have a little conversation, and we might share stories. When did you in your life have an experience of where you had to be resilient, where you had to kind of spring back? I think that the first time that I can relate back was the first time that I was teaching in a school classroom, and I thought I had it all together in my head, but I found out very, very quickly when you're in front of a bunch of kids, they are very creative, and they come up with questions, and I'm sitting there thinking, I know this material backwards and forward. But you can't say to a kid, that's not relevant to the material here. I couldn't cop out of not answering. So I had to find a way to be resilient and to be able to get my way around it, right? So resilience is a piece. Perseverance is like, wow, once again, it was a hard one for me in the very beginning in life because I was so impatient. I would never finish. I'd have everything unfinished, and probably was constantly being picked on, legitimately so, by my grandmother. It said, you never finish anything. You're over here coloring, now you're reading a book, then you're over here, and in an hour's time, you'll have the whole house a mess because you start all these projects and don't finish it. I was like 5 years old, whatever. But that was true, though. So I had decided somewhere around 7 or 8 that I was going to put my mind on something and stick to it till I got it done. And that was when I first started getting a little bit disciplined in the idea of like, I could complete this. I could figure this out. So it just took enough consideration or drive. I wanted to figure out how to get into a building, and I did. I figured it out. I messed with it, and running scenarios in my head for quite a little while. By the time I was around maybe 8 years old, I finally figured out how to sneak into this building. It was kind of cool, and I took a bunch of people with me, and we all got out alive, and nobody got in trouble. It was an adventure. It was a factory, and we wanted to sneak in and take a look at everything from the back side of it rather than from the guarded side. It was fun. It was a fun adventure, but it did require that I contemplated and I could run scenarios. And so resilience was my story with resilience. You see how you start and you reflect on these. Creativity, what can I say? I've already told you about my reef making. Uh, and I realized that it wasn't nearly as creative as I thought it was. And and so what motivated me after that was I got a book on creativity, and I did a workshop. I did it several times on creativity, put together by a couple of psychologists. And so it was kind of the latest pieces of information on creativity. There were two psychologists and an artist putting together a book on creativity. And it's a great book. And I just found it in my library a couple of days ago and was scanning through it. I thought, wow, this brings back memories. Putting this thing together and getting people to do all these creative exercises that were in the book. So I'm applied that when I've noticed that I thought I was creative until the Reef Workshop came along, and that was 20 years ago. And then I decided, oh, wow, I better read up on creativity and start to do some exercises and start to explore what that was. And then as I moved into that, then I got more into stained glass and more into, now today, I started a stained glass project, and I just create my own patterns, and I just kind of bend this and twist this and put this over here and do this over there. And it's all very creative. 20 years ago, if I would see my work today, I would be impressed with it. I think I'm totally creative. So that I'm sure that, I've got a long ways to go yet, but I most certainly have become far more creative, and it did require me attending to it, right? So this is what I'm advocating. Each one of you will have a story about transition when you play with these aspects in your life and how they start to unfold. And the flexibility is most certainly, I think we got flexible when we get married, but I think we get more flexible when we get children. I think that's one of the biggest things that starts to realize we get molded in a different sort of way. And I get away from not having little children around. And then when I get around people that have little children, I have to think about what language they used and so on and so forth, because I'm not around them. I did a workshop in Southern California for kids. Moms had come in and taken classes from me. And he said, can you do a workshop on kind of getting grounded, defining your space? A basic energy workshop, and I'm trying to define yourself, right? Be curious. What does it take for you to get present? And I said, yeah, I'll do one for kids. What the heck? I can do that. We'll do it in a garage somewhere where we got lots of space. We'll throw out a carpet on the floor. We'll get them all on the carpet. I'll bring some props. I'll do a workshop for kids. No problem. Piece of cake. And I'll do it for free. Will be fun. So I had 14 kids, little kids. And so I brought in a bunch of props, and we went through all the different steps. And I had one of the lady, the moms, who was a school teacher. And I said, would you monitor my language? I'm used to adults, right? So would you monitor my language? And so she said, yeah. She said, what do you want me to do? And I said, take that yardstick and hit me if I say something I shouldn't. So the kids see that, but not mean, but kind of a tap, so that they know that, I shouldn't have said that, so that we can make, a moral statement here and not get me in trouble. Now today, it's even worse. You got to be careful of all kinds of words. Somebody just got terminated for the misuse of the word trigger in a local school, triggering the depression, but he wound up getting fired over it. Yeah, crazy, but it's okay. We're just developing all new styles and new states of being, right? So flexibility is one that comes into play. I got all the way through the workshop. When I was done, I said, how'd I do? And she said, really good. You said monkey shit twice, but other than that, not bad. So anyway, that was me at my best, perhaps. All right. So take and reflect on stories. Where in your life did you have an experience, just like I did? Where in your life did you have an experience where you needed to be flexible? It took a little time to be flexible. Where'd you need to have resilience? Where'd you need to have perseverance? Where'd you really need to be creative? What was that experience like? Get those. And then what you do is you go into that 20-minute meditation. And then you take one word at a time, and you feel the resonance of that word and let it map internally. One of the best ways to map internally is to be able to sit there, your eyes closed in a meditation, and I say the word resilience. And then I say it maybe 3 times slowly: resilience, resilience, resilience. And I notice where it goes in my body and how it maps. That tells me how the relationship in my body forms. Now, I don't need to take notes. We're not going to use this data to map something out, write a book or anything, but it starts to allow you to become cognitive of that fact that these things are uniquely different aspects in your body. They have a different time signature, a different relationship to them, and they have a flow rate in your body. And so you get to explore these. We're going to sync them next month, right? We got a little trick we're going to play with, and we're going to get those into sync, right? But for right now, I just want you to start to notice that they are unique in themselves. They actually have a pattern and a response. They move in a certain direction in your body. So this is the beginning of exploring inside you. We want to come out with really going to be able to recreate another whole view of you. That means that when you're in your appropriate state of wellness, you're going to be really good. And when you're not in your appropriate state of wellness, you're a little bit toasted, or maybe just a little bit distracted. You might eat a cookie or who knows what, but not that there's anything wrong with cookies. I think maybe 20 or 30 cookies a day would be troublesome. Maybe, I don't know, I might have 3-4 cookies a year. Maybe now and then I'll have a biscotti, something like that. That's pretty close to a cookie for me. So I'm not much of a cookie eater. And I'm not even so much worried about the sugar. There's not really that much sugar in the cookies that I'd be even inclined to eat. The high sugar ones I wouldn't even touch. But, you know, the whole level of flour, and we're having so much trouble in the United States with our flour issues. And so when I make my trip to France, why I'll be eating pastries and cookies all over the place. But anyway, so whatever your personal experience is, if you have problem digesting the flour here, and for me, it's not a gluten issue at all. But if you have problem digesting the flour here and it becomes an issue, well, then you're gonna have to kind of address that for yourself, right? I don't do pasta. When I have friends that bring pasta that they brought. I got a friend that from Italy, and she goes back to Italy. She brings pasta back. You think that's kind of weird, but it tastes so much better that they have over there, and it settles in the stomach much better than could be a placebo effect. But most certainly, I can eat her pasta. And if I make pasta at home and eat it, it sits in the stomach for about 2 days. So I kind of stay clear of the breads and the pastas. At best, if I go to a hamburger place, I'm like one of those people that take one bun off and throw it away and just eat one bun. Yeah, I'm one of those. Anyway, it's just what works for you is what we're looking at, right? And so play with these 4 aspects, and then go ahead and do a meditation and see where they're humming in your world, right? You'll get a sense of the mapping. If you don't feel one of them seems a little distant from you, then that probably means that it's the one that you've either worked the most with, which for me, because of my impatience, I worked with it from the very beginning in life a lot. So I didn't feel that one. And it's like, wow, it was kind of interesting. And I know that about me. So I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. I didn't recognize that. So as you play with them, if you get one that doesn't map out, wait for another day, wait a couple of days, and do the meditation again and see if, but when you do it again, do all 4 of them so you can start to notice the difference. When you're not noticing a difference, you notice nothing. One of them is either too familiar to you or too distant from you. So it's too numb. We want to evoke these up out of your subconscious, a little more up, so that we can interface with it, which is what we're going to do next month. So we're just practicing. Just like for all those months in the beginning, we practice different pieces with you, right? So you can start to look at yourself and start to know yourself a little more. And now as we apply that technique, we're still doing that. We're getting you to know yourself a little more. So guys, go ahead and have fun with this meditation. And thank you very much for your time. It's been a joy. I'm out there, so if you have any questions or experiences that come up, that's great. And looking forward to talking to you soon. Right? Thanks.